podcast. Troy is back once again. He seems to like the abuse coming on the show, but he brought a friend along. This is Jim Lambert. Is there James?
I go by Jim, but I write under James.
Okay, I can respect that. Most people call me Josh, but the check says Joshua every time. So yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, it works. It works.
Yeah, totally. So this is like I'm expecting this to be very Star Trekky because like you guys are doing the Tao Trek is basically what you're doing. It was your book, right?
Indeed.
Yes, it is. And which it actually came about an interesting way. It was actually the idea of an agent in the UK. It was his idea to do a Star Trek book. He didn't know what to do. It was Jim's idea what to do, and then I jumped in to help Jim as a co-author. So yeah. I mean that's kind of the story.
So I'm going to ask the most evilest question I can right off the bat. Are you guys ready?
Excellent.
So what was your favorite Star Trek series? See, I see. Jim's like, that is evil. That is evil.
So I grew up with the original Trek. I mean, it was in syndication when I was a kid, and it's got a soft spot in my heart forever.
Oh, yeah.
I remember starting Next Generation, and that first season, oh man.
Oh yeah.
Was rough. But
with a couple of exceptions, yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But there's a lot to love in all the rest of them. But you know, if I'm gonna say, it's got to be the first one still.
Okay.
It just, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm gonna say Next Generation is my favorite. That being said, I started out. I mean, and you can tell probably because of our age that I started out on the original series as well. Because, I mean, I was a kid. My uncle was a big Trekkie, and I used to watch it at the babysitter's house when it was in syndication before my mom picked me up. And sometimes she'd pick me up early, and I'd miss the end of an episode, and I would just panic, like, oh my God, I didn't get to see the end of it. And of course, it wasn't like I could go stream it later on Paramount Plus. You know, I mean, you were stuck. You know, you were stuck. We didn't have that. But anyway. So yeah, so the original series is really kind of my first love, but when I go back and watch it now, I like the Next Generation better after season 1. I do have to say that season 1 of the Next Generation was a rough start. It was a rough start.
Okay. So my favorite series, if I have to pick out of all of them, is Deep Space Nine.
Oh yeah.
Because and the reason being is, I'm sorry, that cast is freaking incredible. I don't, to be blunt, I do not think a Star Trek show before or since has come close to that. Now, because even the guest stars on Deep Space Nine could be stars in other shows, right? That depth is unmatched, right?
Yeah.
Also, one of my favorite female protagonists of all time is I'm a big Nana Visitor fan, and I think she's just a total bat. She's one of the 3 biggest badasses in science fiction, in my opinion, right? Behind Sarah Connor and Ripley. That right? I think those are the only other 2 you could put in that weight class, because you respected Kira without ever thinking about how hot she was. You just respected her for who she was as a character. That is something very few women in any genre have done, but she did it with Kira, and I think that's an incredible feat. But that all said, we're gonna go back to Next Generation season 1. I think what happened there, because the original Trek, we'll talk about the original Trek because I do think the original Trek is amazing for a lot of reasons, but Next Generation, I think, had this. They were trying. I think what happens with all the Star Trek shows, I think, because all the season 1s post the original series, there's a little bit of a struggle with all of them, some more than others. I think Next Generation is one of the absolute worst. It's not the worst, but it's one of the absolute worst, right? And that's because they're trying to, I think every show looks for a voice in the show. And I think that in the case of the Next Generation, they were trying to figure out, okay, what from the old show do we like that we want to try to keep in, and how do we make this different And I don't know that they knew what they were doing that first season. The second season, they were able to really, they figured it out. But that first season, you could tell they were just like, we don't know what we're doing. We've never done anything like this before. Help. Right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
It makes a lot of sense. Ignoring the animated series, which is a cool little thing, but that's the first time they restarted. That's the first of the treks that weren't the original. So everybody after them got to see what they did and take their lessons and apply them. So they got better and better and better starting.
Yeah, I would say there is one worse than them, though. That's, in my opinion, Voyager.
Hey, Jim, are you frozen? Is Jim frozen for you? Or is it just for me?
No, it's just for you. Just for you,
just
Jim.
Me.
It's just you, Troy. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I
think Voyager is the worst of the first, because I think they struggled with finding their voice for longer than the first season, in my opinion.
Interesting. Okay.
I would almost argue that Enterprise was at least the first 3 or 4 episodes.
In the first 3 or 4 episodes, I could see it. I think the first season, though, that one's a harder one to measure, because that was a prequel, and that's a little tougher to go by, because I think they have more. Here's the thing about prequels: you know where the story's going, so that's the big. I think that's, and because of that, it's like, okay, you can't go here because we've already established this. You can't go there because we've already established that. I think prequels are harder to. I think there's a harder balance with a prequel, right? That's just my opinion, right?
It's a different struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a different struggle. Right? Like continuity is your enemy, I think, on a prequel series, because you're trying to honor, but you're also like trying to do something different, and you already get where it's going, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a certain amount of canon to deal with a prequel.
Yeah.
That makes it both harder and easier.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know the boundaries of your story. You're not making new boundaries. Because I think Discovery, as then a prequel, and then which turns into a sequel, because of time travel, I think there was a lot more leeway there as far as story and as far as canon was concerned.
Yes.
Sort of. It's kind of like the Kelvin timeline. Like, okay, the reason we have the Kelvin timeline is we don't have to worry about canon now. We can do whatever we want.
Yes.
Sort of. But still within reason. I mean, but the other thing that I will say about first seasons is that always Trekkies have a hard time adapting to the first season of any new Trek. They always say that the line between old and new Trek is constantly moving, and every time as it moves, the first season of whatever now has become new Trek, Trekkies are like, I don't know if I like that.
Yeah,
that is just, and then they warm up to it, right? Most of the time, not always, but most of the time they warm up to it. I had a hard time with Lower Decks. I really did, until I realized what it was and how it was something apart and on its own. And then I went, okay, actually, I do like this.
I like Lower Decks as kind of like an intro to Trek, because it's not designed to be a complicated show, right? It's just not designed to be that way. And I love the Now You Love Me, The Next Generation. It's my second favorite cast, because that is just like it's my second favorite one, because it's in terms of the main cast to main cast, is probably the best cast. Probably.
Yeah.
I think the totality of the DS9 cast is just better. It's just that's my opinion. Right? Right. That's my opinion. I'm okay. You are allowed to disagree with me.
I like the premise of DS9 though, because the premise was different.
I know.
So that's one of the things I liked about the show, was the premise was different.
Yeah.
It was more stationary.
Yeah. I think Voyager's my favorite actual concept. It frustrated me to the nth degree. Yeah. Right? It just frustrated me so much because of what it could have been. I saw what it could have been. It was just like, to me, it was just like, And again, I don't fault the cast at all. I actually think the cast was really decent, all things considered. I really, and honestly, the show did become a lot better when Jerry Ryan 7 joined the show. It became a better show. But I like the concept of you get thrown far away and you're trying to go home is so cool.
Yeah.
And I just was, they had some like balls that were like right there that they never like went with. And I do not understand why, for the nth degree. I'll just say one. I think this is the most obvious one. Ensign Kim. He's literally your opening point of view character in the show. You would think there would be progression in terms of promotion, rising in the ranks, responsibilities. You had an open goal right there. It was literally right there. Yep. And you didn't get it. The other one that drove me absolutely, I'm batshit, was, one of the few things that actually showed like there was movement in the show was Tom Paris and B'Elanna's relationship. They didn't do their wedding on the air. It drove like why? It was like, what? It was again, just why? Right?
Oh.
Right? And that's the thing. Like that's why Voyager does have it. Like, I think when you get to like seasons 5, 6, and 7, Voyager is a good show. But 1 through 4, oh man. Oh, I was it. There were points when I was watching that. It was just like, and that's all right. I'm a Trekkie. I am a Trekkie, folks. I watch Voyager seasons 1 through 4, and you have to be a Trekkie to watch those episodes. Right? There are some good ones in there, but you know what I mean. There was just that frustrating lack of progression. It was okay with the Next Generation. It was okay with the original series because, the original series. And this is what I love about it. Every episode felt so different. I thought that was actually. I think that's one of the. I don't think any Star Trek since has been able to do that as well. Yes, some of it's a little dated, some of it's a little antiquated, but there's a charm to it. Right?
Oh yeah.
All right. But again, different worlds. It is like, for anyone that loves science fiction, just the whole concept, especially old school science fiction, the Star Trek series, the original one's always going to have a special place in your heart because it celebrates that better than any of the other shows. Right? Any of them, right? That's that. So there's a charm to that, but the characters don't change that much, and that's fine because again, that was the nature of the show. The Next Generation also kind of has that same thing. There's no linear. There is some progression for sure, but it's a lot less. It's a lot less obvious than say Deep Space Nine, where you see a boat ton of progression with every character. So once you got to that point, the next show kind of had to do something like that, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't. And it drove me.
Well, I mean, if you think about, though, the original series and Next Generation, they were very episodic. The episodes were very contained rather than more of a seasonal series type thing like some of the newer stuff is. Right? So part of that distinct differences between a lot of the episodes, even in Next Generation, some of the episodes, when you take them by themselves, I mean, man, what a unique story in just that one episode, right? So they're very episodic rather than now we have things that are much more serialized, like the entire season is a story. So if you miss one in the middle, if you missed a Star Trek in the middle of the original series, you just go back and watch it later. It was an episode all its own. It was a story all its own. If you miss an episode in Discovery, you start the next one. You go, oh man, I missed something. There's something I didn't see.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of TV has moved that way. There isn't Dragnet anymore. It's these serialized things where the entire cast, the entire story, the whole background moves.
But there are still the odd series here and there where they are one and dones. But there has to be at least a little bit of progression. If you compare, the Next Generation, there were lots of changes, especially early in the show, right? Tasha Yar's death, Geordi got promoted, Dwarf got promoted, right? You had a sense of movement with the crew, even throughout the arc of Trek. Now, yes, it was episodic. People lived to the end of the day. There was always the crisis was solved. The adventures were. But you still got a sense of the characters had grown. Captain Picard, when he starts in the first season and who he is in the 7th season, are not the same people at all. Right? Now, are there parts of him that are more... Now, again, you compare it to, say, Deep Space Nine, where Sisko starts and ends. Yeah, there's a much bigger character depth with Sisko than Picard. But even with Picard, like Inner Light's still one of my all-time favorite Star Trek episodes.
Yes.
Like, one of my all-time favorite ones. It's so... And Jim's like, yes, you speak my language! Right? But again, that showing that humanity of Picard became such a really cool part of the later seasons of Star Trek, of Next Generation. One of my favorite supporting cast members from that series was Ro Laren. Her evolution and growth throughout, right, was fun to watch too. Like, they had these little like pockets where you could see the characters change and grow. Yeah. Right? I'm not going to harp on Voyager much more. I promise. There was actually some good to Voyager too. It was much harder to see that progression in Voyager. It really was. And that's, I don't blame the actors on this. I think what they were trying to do with Voyager's case was they wanted to go back to the old Star Trek episodic thing, which is not in of itself a bad thing. I get that. But they had, again, something what you say, we're no longer in an age of that one and done, right? Characters don't grow or change. They have to grow and change. Even if it's tiny things, they have to grow and change. And the problem is when I look at like 7 and 9, the Doctor, maybe Baton Paris and B'Elanna a little bit, maybe. That's it. It's again the growth. Like, you don't see the same growth. And like I said, I'm not going to mention the Henson Kim again because that hurts. That hurts just a little bit. But that now, Voyager does have its good qualities. I think they actually said more unique stuff about, say, the Borg, for example, like than any other show. Now, they did some other things to the Borg I'm not as crazy about, but but the idea of what that experience was, recovering from that experience, I thought Voyager said more about that than any of the other shows. I thought that was one, and that's to their credit. I think they did a really good job with that.
Yeah. Well, what was fascinating about this book was in getting beta reader feedback initially was that, like, I am not a fan of Enterprise at all. But the only thing negative that I said about Enterprise in the book, I took out. You won't see it in there now.
What was it?
And the reason is because there was one of our beta readers who said, "Hey, I'm an Enterprise fan, and there are other Enterprise fans," because I did not like the start to Enterprise, and really overall, I thought it was the weakest Star Trek series so far. And there are other Trekkies who feel the same way.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
However, there are some who really, really like it. And so I had to go, okay, because I felt that way about Enterprise doesn't mean that everyone felt that way about Enterprise. It's easy to interject my own opinions over that. While at the same time, I felt like, as we move into now really new Trek, I had to reevaluate, like, what do I like and what don't I like about this and why? Because I tried to look at it through the eyes of a new Star Trek fan, not me, not my perspective. And that's hard to do because I come with Trekkie baggage. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I come with Trekkie baggage. So, but I think that was one of the most interesting things about writing this book was actually going back and watching old Trek and then coming back in and watching new Trek and seeing the evolution of, because part of the point of the book is how, not only how Star Trek has impacted society, but how society has impacted Star Trek. And Star Trek itself has changed in relation to the way society has changed. The way the series are created now is much more in line with the way other sci-fi series are created now. rather than harkening back to the old Trek. Now, we don't know what Strange New Worlds is going to be like, but from everything that I hear about it, us old Trekkies are probably going to like that one. That's probably going to become a new favorite for us, but we'll have to wait and see.
Well, I think probably the best example of that is looking at how the series Picard works, because if you really sit there and think about it, it's almost it's the same Picard in a lot of ways, but it's a very different Picard in some ways too. Because I think my favorite thing about I'm thumbs in the middle on Picard. I'm thumbs in the middle. And no, because here I think this is typical for an old Star Trek fan. Because what I really like about it is I like that they still kept Jean-Luc Picard, the idealist, very much in the show. And I think it's interesting that he's now a very old man looking at a new world. I think that is such a really cool idea. I really do. But at the same time, this is the old man telling the clouds thing. Shut up, clouds. All right. But it's the old man telling the clouds thing, right? That's not my Starfleet. That's not my like there is again, I think this is one of the hardest things. I'm a comic book guy, so I understand this very much so. We all have these properties we really, really love. And I think one of the hardest things we have to acknowledge to ourselves, and it's a hard thing as a Trekkie, not all these shows are made for me. And that was a very humbling thing. Like, my ego got crushed. Just you know how big my ego is there.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing is, right. You realize, like, again, it's nature. Like, when something becomes this big, and Star Trek is a big property, no matter what anybody says, it gets to a point where it's thinking about what masters it serves. Now, Picard is something for a guy like me who has watched the old shows. You want to probably get somebody into new. Discovery may not be for me, right? Because it's a different sensibility of Star Trek than the older stuff was. That doesn't say Discovery isn't a good show. But it's a different Star Trek. The Star Trek movies, right? The old ones and the new ones. What a different tone, concept. Like you can see it. Star Trek has, again, you're right. Society hasn't changed Star Trek as much as Star Trek has changed society. And you can see it in how the stories are told, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can see it. Like, they're just different. And that's why I'm thumbs in the middle on Picard. It's not the old way of how the stories I really loved about Picard way back in the day. They keep some of that, but not all of it. And I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. Right. That's the thing about that. Right. But that's me speaking as an old fan, not as a current fan. Right. Because I don't have someone that doesn't have that history. Right. May see it very, very differently. And that's something I have to accept too.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's really interesting about this whole discussion is it talks to one of the big concepts of Star Trek, infinite diversity and infinite combinations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did not picture in 1970 whatever, when I was watching Star Trek after school, I did not picture the kind of diversity that we have on screen in the world today. That was not what I pictured, right? But part of that was because I had no way of knowing that. Like, I had nothing to relate that to, nothing at all. But now I absolutely love that aspect of it. But the other application of that is that there are an infinite number of Star Trek fans, and we have to embrace the diversity in the fan base as well that says, I really like this show, and the other person says, I really hate this show. Okay, well,
hey, Dakota.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's a cool chat thing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Welcome to Twitch.
That's
This is why
cool.
I'm on Twitch, right? We can actually.
Oh, you were on Twitch too, man. We're on everything.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, so that's part of that is, like I say, there's an infinite number of fans and a diverse number of fans, and what I had to kind of reset my mind and think about was that, and I've had to do this in other areas of my life. So it's actually, it very much relates to the philosophy of Star Trek. is that I've had to sometimes step back and reset and go, okay, not everyone is like me. And as weird as it seems like to have to actually reset and do that, there have just been times when, like, when I worked in the museum industry. I started in the museum industry. I thought everybody came to museums for the same reasons I did. And it wasn't true, but it was, I mean, it was a nice thing for me to assume for about 12 seconds until I figured out that wasn't true, right? So I think even as we approach Star Trek, as we approach anything that we're big fans of, it's the same. We need to go, okay, not everybody approaches this the same way I do. And actually, that is perfectly okay.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. Some of this series is not made for me. It's not made for my generation, and that's perfectly okay. It's all good.
I put in a thing in the convention section that you know how Star Trek and Star Wars fans tend to clash. You know, or ours is better, theirs is better, ours is better. And the thing is, I noticed going to as many conventions as I have that they have a lot in common. They both understand being a fan at that level. I am a fan of Star Trek. I am a fan of Star Wars. They can communicate on that level and understand each other, that you're another fan like me that likes something that I prefer something else, but we both get along because we can both understand each other that, hey, these are cool things and we're not in the mainstream, and we have these interests that are outside the main.
I equate Star Wars and Star Trek to ice cream flavors. One's vanilla, one's chocolate. Does it really matter? Like, if you tell me you hate ice cream, I think you're a liar. But if you tell it right, but I just do. I'm sorry. I am very much that. I'm in that mindset. If you say you hate ice cream, I think you're probably lying to me, right?
I do not believe you.
Exactly. You know what? That's pretty much it. It's like, that's not. Now, if you tell me I prefer chocolate to vanilla, okay, I'll buy that. I prefer vanilla to chocolate. I'll buy that too. Hey, there's nothing, like, no one's gonna argue with that, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you say I don't like that tiger stripe, that's cool. I'm not gonna judge you, right? You tell me I don't like ice cream, you're gonna have words. I think.
Yeah, but
right.
Now, but wait 1 minute though, because we do have to differentiate that this particular brand of, let's say, Star Wars is vanilla, because I'm going to say Star Wars is vanilla,
Okay.
and that Star Trek is chocolate, right? But if JJ Abrams tried to do a twist of those two things, there would be bad things happening. I mean, that would just not work.
Actually, I'll tell you what I think the big difference between Star Wars and Star Trek is, actually. But hold on. I'm also a Star Trek fan. Sometimes with the character in new series and films, similar to Star Wars or James Bond. The character of the people has changed. There are only a few good actors who have this positive charm. Picard still exists. Well, Dakota, like we just mentioned, we just talked about Picard actually just before you came on. And one of the things we pointed out was that it's almost like two different Picards. There's still a lot of the tonal things are the same, right? A lot of the tonal things are the same, but there are some big notorious differences, and so we gotta bring in the JJ Abrams situation because he touched both. We have to.
I did mention it, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
Crap.
So he did both Star Wars and Star Trek. So I think this is what I don't like what he did with Star Trek. He dumbed it down.
Yeah, I'm just gonna throw it out there. Okay, the first Star Trek movie that Abrams did, right? Star Trek 2009, whatever that thing was, right? Mm-hmm. It has to be one of the dumbest stories ever.
It's this up there.
Red thing just basically is the dumbest MacGuffin ever, because it just does whatever the writers need it to do to make the story work, right? So I don't like that. It's not that I didn't like the rebirth of the characters. What I hated was the story was poorly constructed and crap. Now, I mean, they got it better as they got along in the next two. At least the stories were better, a little bit better. But I think this is what the biggest thing, if and when Star Trek returns to the big screen, the biggest thing with Star Trek has always been story. It's always been about our humanity, and that when we go to space, we're still human beings. We still have the same faults and stuff like that. And it's like you say, that character development in a lot of the later series that was missing in the first few seasons of Voyager is really what we all tuned in to see. We tuned in to see what would Kirk do. What would he do in this situation? We turned in to see the characters, the space setting, all of those different things were in addition to that. I think Abrams went over the top and too much for the special effects and the space setting, and beautiful cinematography and the ships and all that kind of stuff. And somewhere in there we left the story behind, and that was the biggest fault of Star Trek 2009. And I will just step off my soapbox and get away from that one now. But anyway,
okay.
But I got totally swept up in the reintroduction of the characters. I loved seeing these new actors do the characters again. Urban doing McCoy was just a treat.
Yes.
And Scotty.
Scotty was brilliant. I love Scotty. Scotty was awesome.
And all the in-jokes and things, those were all cool. There was a lot of stuff that didn't work, but those were fun.
So here's what I can mention. I can apply this to JJ Abrams and Star Wars too. This is what I learned with JJ Abrams. You gotta turn your brain off. You just you have to, because he does a really good. One of the things I really dug, like, you compare. I'm gonna be blunt. Outside of First Contact, I enjoyed Insurrection, but I can see why a lot of people didn't. Right? Outside of First Contact, Star Trek hadn't had a good movie in a long time, and so going in a different direction and making it a little bit more action oriented wasn't entirely a bad idea. I think what makes Star Trek interesting, though, is the cerebral parts of it, the parts where you look at the moral dilemmas of what you're doing, because again, those are where the character moments come in, right? That's something that was completely missed in those trilogies. And that new trilogy, unfortunately, by and large, is that was ignored. Whereas the new Star Wars, also similar being. Listen, that Death Star that Death Star weapon that you could see going across straits annihilating planets, like, you have to turn your brain off. Like, you have to. It doesn't work any other way. Right? It just doesn't. So now I do think Abrams is better suited for Star Wars for the most part. We'll leave Rise of the Skywalker out of this conversation because we're talking Star Trek tonight. But
we're on Star Trek. We'll have another discussion about Star Wars another time.
Yeah. But again, I think I love, like, what Abrams was really good is he brings a good energy. He brought a good energy to Star Trek that was sorely missing, and this is what I will give him. It needed that energy to go into a different direction, and it's cool to see. I don't think Discovery would have happened if it wasn't for those Star Trek movies, and that's just my opinion, right? Now, Picard, maybe not, but Discovery, I think, is definitely a byproduct of those movies and being able to go in that direction. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. No. In Dakota, we're not. I am not even gonna, like. There's a lot.
Oh yeah, there's
good that comes.
Yeah, first of all, there's no Star Wars hate here. I happen to like both, and I don't. I think that there's room for both in your individual fandom, and I think there are some great stories. Mandalorian is a fantastic story. Yeah. But yeah, all good. It's all good. But and I will say this, that I think Alex Kurtzman is a much better showrunner than JJ Abrams, but I don't know if he could do a movie. I don't know how well he would do with a movie without somebody like Abrams to help him. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know how well that would work. Now, I could be wrong, but I think Kurtzman is a better showrunner, but I think that he does borrow a lot in cinematic quality from Abrams and in the action quality from Abrams. And I do agree with that. I only wish that the story had been a little bit better. Like, I would like to see more of the moral dilemmas of the violation of the Prime Directive. Like, okay, the Prime Directive is like Star Trek gospel, except that every single captain, multiple times per season, violates it for a reason that they can justify. right? Now, but if we think about how we apply this to our own lives, think about how often we have a standard that we say, this should be the standard, except in this situation, which I happen to be in. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so, but yet we do see that. I think part of the whole philosophy behind that was that there is this rule, but this rule is an aspirational rule, and not one that we're always going to achieve. And I would like to see more of those aspirational principles in Star Trek, in the newer Star Trek, and see, which we get a little bit of that in the later Discovery. So I do like that aspect of it, but that we get more of that aspirational philosophy that then we say, this is why it's aspirational and not something we can do all the time.
I love it too when sometimes the prime director is challenged by a very valid reason. I think that's the one thing about, it's like sometimes when you look at, say, for example, Kirk, I mean, he probably broke the prime directive more than just about any other captain, probably all of them, right? So,
Yeah.
but sometimes his reasons were really good, like really, really
Yeah.
good, and you were like, it makes sense, right? How can we sit there and let this culture die, right? How can we? They can't
Yeah.
fight back. They can't do anything against this. If somebody doesn't step in, they're dead, and they don't deserve to die. Those are really cool moments. I one of my favorite episodes in Next Generation, there was this Data getting this message from afar from this little girl about the world dying. And,
Oh, yes.
oh yeah, that one's really good because it's like, you are to terminate this message. Picard goes, and then they all hear the message, and it's like, well, shit, we can't. We have to do something about this. And it's one of those, you get like the humanity in that was like, is what made that really powerful. It wasn't, and they knew what they were doing, and he's like, yeah, we're breaking the rule, but fuck it, these people they don't deserve this. This is unfair. And that, again, very human at the end of the day. And this is something that Star Trek makes possible. This is something Star Wars doesn't do. Again, Star Wars is a different thing altogether. It's an adventure. It's more of an adventure show. This is what makes Star Trek Star Trek. So when you look at it like from that perspective, right? I think that's the thing about modern Trek. Again, it's that line of having those, maybe in this those maybe world view kind of things. I think as a world, we're a lot more jaded and cynical now than we were 20, 30 years ago. So it's hard to have something that's ideological. And let's face it, Star Trek at its very core is actually kind of romantic. It's a very romantic concept, right?
Yeah.
When the romance gets beaten out of you a little bit, it's kind of hard to go look at it. It's like, yeah, I still love you, right? We got to give you some problems too, because I got problems, and you know.
Yeah. Well, and this is our society has become very divisive.
Yes.
Right. It's become very it's become very split on a lot of different issues. And I think the one thing that Star Trek did and still does to a certain extent is to allow room for differences of opinion. And to say, even if you're wrong, what we want to look at is what's behind it. What's your incentive? What's your motivation? Because I think intent should play a much larger role in how we look at someone else and what they do in the world. What is their intent? I mean, it's hard for us to look right now at some of the current world situations and see any kind of positive intent on the part of certain individuals invading certain countries, we'll say.
That's one. There's a lot of examples we can go by. In
There's a lot of examples.
Yeah,
where you know the incentive for doing it, the impetus for doing something is just straight up evil. But I think that there are other things where certain people's intent is to do good. And we need to allow room for their opinions, even if we disagree with them, and say, you know what, I understand that you're trying to do good. I don't necessarily feel that you're correct in that, but I want to at least applaud your intent. And I think Star Trek does that to a certain extent. Devil in the Dark is one of my favorite examples. You know, the intent was a mother protecting her young. The outcome was she was killing people. Well, you know, obviously, okay. But if someone's threatening my young, What am I going to do? Well,
The other,
you know, yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
the other thing to keep in mind is the somebody once told me that bad decisions, best available data, BAD. You
Mhm.
can't make a decision and know what's going to happen on the other side. If the pandemic is a great example, do you mask? Do you vaccinate? Do you lock everyone down? When you decide which of those you want to do or what combination, you don't know how it's going to work out. You don't know
Mhm.
how it's going to work out if you don't, and you don't know how it's going to work out if you do. You have to go with what
Something.
the data points you towards, and that creates a lot of moral dilemmas that you can use in these stories as well. You don't know how it's going to come out, so you have to do the best you can.
I think though, well, compared to real world issues, I think the one luxury Star Trek does do is there's a certain, and this is where I'm a very jaded individual. I don't like this is where I'm jaded. I look at what goes on today. It doesn't matter what the issue is. I question the integrity of people in charge. I
Absolutely.
just do. It's that is just at this point. I have very little reason to believe that anybody I'm watching has any integrity, which makes it very hard for me as a person to trust anything they say. That is my little bit of cynicism about the world. Now, where Star Trek does so, this is where Star Trek does well. It shows integrity in these decisions, right? When you understand, like it's easy. Sometimes a bad decision is simply, as you say, just a lot best available data. You make a choice, right? And that is totally a very valid argument, but that assumes integrity. So, and that's really right. That assumes integrity because once you right, so assuming integrity, yes. But then at that point, this is what you do. It's about three things: intention, impact, interpretation. Those are the three
Mm-hmm.
things. Those are the three things that what it comes down to. Intention, protecting the young. Honorable intention. Impact, you're killing everybody else. Interpretation, that's interesting, right? She's not evil in the traditional sense. She's just simply following nature. Is you can understand that. Now, that's interpretation. Can you fix it at that point? Can you make it in a way that she can live and and you don't have to deal with it, or can't you? Do you have to deal with this?
Yeah.
Tension, impact, interpretation, right? But
Yeah.
all of that assumes integrity, right?
Well, yeah.
That's the big thing. That is the
And
absolute.
that's
And that,
what Trek does, though,
yeah,
with Starfleet, is the assumption is made
yeah.
that when you get through Starfleet Academy and you are a captain or whatever, that you have a certain amount of integrity. Now,
Mm.
what's interesting about that is that many of the admirals pictured throughout Star Trek, who are obviously
None.
have gone higher than the captain in the captain's chair, many of them lack integrity.
Uh,
And so it's an interesting um, parallel to our own world that when you achieve a certain level of power, we have to assume that your integrity has been compromised somewhere along the way.
Oh, I think probably the darkest episode of the entire Next Generation has probably the evilest admiral of all was the dude, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, the Pegasus episode where
Oh,
Riker, I can't
yeah.
remember
What
his
was that
name.
guy's name?
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but that dude
Oh,
was the evilest of them all, like literally the evilest of them all. Uh, there had been some shady admirals before him and after him, but that motherfucker was man. Man, I wouldn't piss on him if he was on fire. I mean, that's how corrupt that guy was, right? And
yeah,
right,
yeah.
so, yeah, no, that guy was as evil as it got, and I really, I like that's one of my favorite. That's probably my favorite Will Riker episode because, it showed who he was, right? It really showed who he was and what he was dealing with, and all his because he had a checkered past. But again, you look at what he thought. Again, we go back to interpretation and intention. He was trying to be the good officer and following his captain's orders, not realizing just how bad of a piece of shit he was because he was just a rookie, right?
Yeah.
That was
so he doesn't know.
He didn't know, but he's guilty as hell because he survived something that killed a lot of good people. Like that was such an interesting look in Riker's psyche, right?
Well, also another interesting aspect of this that I just kind of thought of, and I mean we kind of touch on it in the book, but not real deeply, is that Starfleet is a military organization, and having been in the military, when you're in the military, generally speaking, you simply obey orders, right? If you get an order from that evil admiral, you kind of do it anyway. If you get the order to stand down and delete the message from that little girl, you do it anyway. When you go against orders, there are generally kind of rather large consequences. Let's just put it that way. There's rather large consequences.
No,
and having been a creative person in the military, I have suffered some of those consequences myself. But anyway, being said, that I think when we see Star Trek, when we see them disobeying orders, there's some part of us as humans that applauds that courage to not do what you're supposed to do, as far as to not do what you're told, to do what is right rather than that which is dictated by the rules. And I think that this is a part of us as humans, that we want to be the person that would break the rules, but we often don't.
There's a couple ways to go at this. I'll go with this one. I have thoughts, so let's like.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We do this every time. We do this every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So I think this is how I think it goes. There's a certain degree of, is this worth my fucking time to question? You know, the old why ask why, right? Why ask why? Because let's okay. You've been in the military. If anybody here has worked for any big organization, you know there is a certain level of dysfunction you see. Right, we'll just leave it at that. There's a certain level of dysfunction you see, and the thing is, at some point, you realize that what you see, everybody sees. So the question then becomes: is why isn't something done about it? Now, on a small level, you recognize again, and then on a small level, you recognize that I can't fix this. This is just what it is. That's it. And you realize this. You do realize it as an individual that's where it goes. At the same time, right? But I do think we all have this point, and I realize this too. If you feel there's a large degree of deception, I think this is just with every human being. If we feel it in our bones that there's a deception or that this feels wrong, we all have that point in ourselves where we just go, I can't do this anymore. I just can't for whatever, like, and all of us, that's a different level. Every one of us has our own little guide on what that is. But when you hit that, you'll go against the whole world. It's just in our nature to do. Like maybe the whole world says we're wrong. We don't care because in ourselves we've hit that point. I think that's what happens with a lot of. I think we all hit that. And I think what happens in Star Trek, what you see in Star Trek is, right, you see people that are going out in the frontier and seeing all these things happening. And you get to a point, and this is why the Prime Directive gets broken a lot, is this is bullshit. Like they may not say it quite the same way, but this is bullshit. And sometimes, again, you choose your battles too. They don't break it every single episode, or they wouldn't be captain on the ship anymore in all likelihood, right? But there comes a point when, right? There just comes a point when you just realize, like, I have to. And I've seen this with guys in the military, right? Yeah, you probably were punished a few times. I'm pretty sure with you, when you hit that point, you just realize, like, this is bullshit. I gotta do it. I don't, like, right? I have to.
Yeah, trouble or no, I'm gonna do it. But what's interesting is that you bring that up that way, because if we think about the premise of Picard, of the new Picard, why did Picard leave Starfleet? He left Starfleet because he violated orders broke the Prime Directive, and then said, okay, if this is what you want me to do, I'm not doing that anymore. And he left. And then they asked him back, right? So I think that this is that's actually really relevant to exactly what you're talking about. Is we all get fed up to a point where we say, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. This is garbage. This is junk, and this is not the way I'm going to live my life, right? And I mean, for me, okay, then I left the military. 4 years and out. I'm done, right? Because there's way too much bullshit here. I just can't handle it, right? But
sure.
But I mean, which is fair. There's some people that are built for the military, some people that aren't, right? But I think that what we see too is that out on the frontier, out on the edge, the rules that applied on Earth don't apply in the same way in those places. And I think it's part of what we see too is that when you're on the edge, and this applies to almost any area of your life, when you're on the edge and out there really in the innovation sphere, the whole point is that sometimes you have to break the rules. And I think that the very creation of the show Star Trek and the very fact that it got greenlit and the things like the letter writing campaign that brought it back for an additional season and all those different things, I think that those were things that were breaking the rules at the time. And this was the precedent that Star Trek set from the beginning, was kind of like, we're going to make new rules. We're going to break the rules and make new ones. And even George Lucas said it was one of the things that made Star Wars possible. Star Trek opened up people's minds to the idea of an adventure in space.
Yeah.
It opened it up. And then when it had success, then people said, well, maybe we can do something with Star Wars too. Because George Lucas was hitting the same brick wall that Roddenberry was hitting when he was shopping a series around, until he found the person that believed in it. And so, I mean, I think as much as Star Trek and Star Wars fans, clash or whatever, each one made the other one possible.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's that too.
There would not have been a Star Trek movie without a Star Wars movie. Like that, honestly, there wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wait a second. You said there wouldn't have been a Star Trek without a Star Wars?
No, a Star Trek movie.
That was in 77, right?
I thought the movie was 80.
Star Wars was 77.
Yeah,
and Star Trek the motion picture was 1980, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that
I
correct?
had them backwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Because I remember when Star Wars came out. Yeah, because I mean, anyway, that's a long story about my childhood that I'll tell another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, my family. What's interesting, and I talk about this very little in the book, and I'm going to talk about it later in a book that I'm going to write somewhere down the road. But that for me, science fiction was a really big deal, because I grew up in a very conservative religious environment, and they did not like science fiction at all, because there were a bunch of evolutionists and atheists writing that stuff, and those people were evil. We all know that. And so I actually, to see Star Wars, I snuck over to my friend's house who had HBO and had a VCR and was able to watch Star Wars. And when I watched Star Trek at the babysitter, my mom would pick me up early. She was not a fan of the fact that I was watching Star Trek, right? Because this was a philosophy that really did, and it's something people don't necessarily think about now, but it really did butt heads with the conservative religious movements of the time.
Sure.
So it really did butt heads with them. And so for those of us who were inside those movements, kind of trying to break out, science fiction was an escape from that. And it was a way that, like, I learned more about the world, the real world, through sci-fi than I learned through some of my textbooks. And that's, you know what I mean? There's a whole other philosophy lesson there, except to basically say that this is one of the reasons that writing this book resonates so heavily with me, is because for me, the philosophy of Star Trek was one of the first times when I had seen the principle at all of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, and accepting those differences. In my world where I grew up, not accepting those differences was the norm. It was expected.
No.
So yeah. Anyway.
No, I mean, in all fairness, the fact that, okay, going back to the original Trek, Uhura was actually on the show. The fact that they had a guy that played a Russian, Chekhov, right? They had Scotty. They had all these different cultures on the planet. Next Generation took it a step further. The fact that they had Worf, like Worf as a character, an alien actually on the ship, Data, right? I mean, there's and some of the best episodes of Next Generation involved Data and who he was and what he did. Then Deep Space Nine, the first black captain, right? The first black captain, the first female first officer, right? In the series, Voyager. Hey, like I said, I have my proclivities, but I'll give them credit. The devils are due. First female captain was on Voyager, right? So, and then although the prequel was kind of a step backwards, and so I understand why Enterprise was not your thing, right? I get it. I totally get it. But same thing. They went back and explored other cultures that they never explored in previous. Like the Vulcans, as much as Spock was such a big part of the original Trek, Vulcan culture didn't really get touched a ton until
because of his half humanity.
Yeah.
But that was another aspect of it, was they were mixed cultures. You know, someone who was half human. I mean, if we think about one of the first interracial kisses on television was between Kirk and Uhura. I mean, you know, for our generation, that was a big deal. And I think, like, as we move forward to Discovery and stuff like that, we see same-sex relationships that are healthy, really good relationships that I personally really, really like. And we're seeing them played out on the big screen in space in a way that we don't necessarily see them in other series. And for me personally, I absolutely love it. But I do understand why there are people that Star Trek is still, they hate that inclusion of everyone, because they want everyone to look like them in the shows and the things that they watch. And obviously those are not my people. You know what I mean? Those are not my people. But it's a hard thing. Oh yeah, let there be light. Oh my God, there he is. But anyway, I mean, you know what I mean? So I think, you know, the way it was groundbreaking from the beginning in those ways is ways that philosophy still continues through the new Trek, and I love it. Absolutely love it.
Very cool.
Oh, the Cthulhu mythos. Yeah, we should talk about that sometime. I've actually written a romantic comedy that involves Cthulhu under a pen.
Bad person. You're a bad person.
No. I am a really bad person. I am a really bad person for written in that, but it was so much fun, and I absolutely love it. Anyway.
It's okay. I almost wrote a Cthulhu Alice in Wonderland story because they asked me to do it. They asked me to do it because I took Greek mythology and Alice in Wonderland and I put it together. So I get Alice in Wonderland. So the story I would really want to tell is something like what happens if the Mad Hatter meets Cthulhu, because who actually is the crazier of the two of them, right? Because
there you go.
Now that's interesting, because the book I've written is actually so Cthulhu comes on vacation in Delaware, as one does, and he meets and falls in love with Internet Karen, and they have an adventure together, because the epitome of evil from two different worlds. You know, I mean, what can I say about that? The book is called Carl Karen. I'm not going to tell you what the author name is. If you are listening to this and you want to find it, go find it, because we're not talking about that today.
No,
we're talking about our book, The Tao Trek. But anyway.
Can't help himself.
Told you he was a bad guy.
But I couldn't help myself because of you talking about the Cthulhu mythos. Because I actually love that too, because I love the Cthulhu, the aspect of that he's just the ultimate evil. There's no redeeming characteristics. Okay. You know, now in some of the alternate Cthulhu stories, the Lovecraftian mythos that's spun off of the original, but in the original, there's no redeeming qualities. That's one of the other things I like about Star Trek is, in many cases, there is a redeeming quality to what we first perceive as evil. Now, this isn't true all through the series, but if we think about, like we were talking about Devil in the Dark and some of the other early episodes, what we at first we perceive as evil right, and is bad, there are redeeming qualities within those villains. And I think that that's also an important aspect of making your villain someone that we can also relate to. And I mean, obviously, we've taken that to an extreme with other series that are, and other things that are around. But I think that it's an important aspect of things is to understand that everyone is the hero of their own story.
I think this is what Star Trek does better than everybody else is that they show that where people have things have in common, right? Even if they are completely different, they do a really good job of, okay, like we're gonna go back Next Generation and I'm making other examples in other series. There was this episode where Picard his mentor died, and there's this archaeological puzzle. I'm gonna get to the origin of all species is this one race. So the Klingon and the Cardassian rejected this outright. The Romulan, of all people, talked to Picard after. It's like, so we're not that different after all. That's interesting because the enemy said, hey, we're not so different. Our ally said, fuck you. All right? That's pretty much what he said, right? Right? That's pretty much what he said. But our enemy, Deep Space Nine, Jem'Hadar. It's like an warrior race bred for combat. One of my favorite episodes there is when DS9 crew had teamed with the Jem'Hadar. It's interesting to see their own style of justice and honor, right? Voyager, the Borg, ironically enough. I mean, again, there are some things about we won't go into too many details. I do the turning the Borg into run-of-the-mill villains was a terrible idea, but showing common themes, like especially survivors. I think my favorite episode was the one where Grace tried to create a collective similar to the Borgs, and you could see how the Borg could come to be, and it was interesting, right? You could see where anybody could become them. That's terrifying, but interesting, right? Right?
Well, because it's one of those. I think when we see villains that are sympathetic, it's one of those "but for the grace of God, there go I" type moments, of like, if I had taken, I mean, I look at my own life and I'm like, there are various points, if I had taken a different turn, things could have turned out much, much differently. And I could have been just as evil as, as other terrible people that have done terrible things. I could have done terrible things if I'd made different choices. And I think that's part of what Star Trek, even with the Borg, to an extent, even though you're right, they did become run-of-the-mill villains, and it wasn't as interesting when that happened. But if we think about like the way they started, or even to a different extent in Discovery, in the latest parts of Discovery, which I won't give away in case people haven't seen them, but I will tell you there's an organism that is grouped together at the end to basically protect themselves and protect their society. And if you see the why of why they're gathering together, and then you see their intent and what happens later on, you can see that this was survival. This is not evil. This is not bad. This is survival. These are the very things that we would do as humans to protect ourselves and our species. So, I mean, I don't know. I just can't say enough about just how, although the philosophy of Star Trek has changed in some ways, in other ways it has not.
The meta of it is still the same.
The meta of it is still the same.
Yeah.
There's a different application for sure. And there are certainly some Star Trek properties that have missed the mark. But when we look at Lower Decks, I think Lower Decks, now that I've watched more of it and I've kind of fallen in love with the series, I think it's one of the most Star Trek of Star Treks that are out right now. It's focusing on meaningful work. People that are in basically shit jobs in the bottom of the ship, but those people matter just as much to the overall mission as the captain on the bridge. There's one episode where one of the guys who's an engineer, he cleans out like the replicator chutes or something like that, and he tries to transfer and go to different departments on the ship, and every department that he tries, is not a fit for him. And every one of them, he keeps looking back at those tubes and going, man, that tube is just not as clean, because that's what the dude was built to do. And I think we need to, I think as we step back in our philosophy and as we look at the world around us, we need to just stop looking at people that are doing what we consider menial jobs as someone who's not as meaningful as somebody who is doing a broader job. I think that the one thing the pandemic has done is has pointed out that those menial jobs that we thought of that way are not menial jobs. Those are necessary. Those became what we called essential workers as soon as we needed them bad enough.
Okay. I will. No, I just hate the essential worker concept as a phrase. I get where you're coming from. I think the worst. Again, we won't go into details in this because it's not this conversation. But I think the very worst thing we did was turn these people into heroes because we do not treat heroes well as a society. My opinion. Right. That's my opinion. Now, that all said, I'm just as someone that has done the essential job, right?
Yes.
Right. As someone, no, like the one thing that's very true, no matter what walk of life you go in, everyone is valuable. Everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, right? Everyone can contribute something to life. Everybody can be more and do more. It comes down to how appreciated we are. The other thing the pandemic showed, unfortunately, is how much of a crisis we have in treating people. That is a huge problem. That was
Absolutely.
A problem before the pandemic. It's a problem. I don't know if we're quite post-pandemic, but we're going to say we're at that panda enda kind of.
Panda enda stage.
We're at the panda enda phase of it. I don't think we're ever going to go back to the full lockdown thing anymore. But again, we'll see how things go. We never treat as a culture, we have become very profit driven, and we've done it at the expense of these people. And that's right. And that is not only an injustice, like look at, for example, the medical situation in the United States right now. Okay. You have a shortage of people. And the biggest reason why is you don't pay them what they're worth. When you get right down, these people aren't looking for these jobs because they're going to get paid, but it comes down to respect. We live in a world today where people get paid where we look at what you get paid as your value, respect. The fact that we do not pay these people anywhere close to what they're worth is an indication of how we treat them. That's wrong.
Yes.
That has been wrong for as long. That was wrong even before the pandemic. It's wrong now. It's been wrong for a long time. It's not just them. People that work at a grocery store, people that are right. They provide a very valuable service.
It's widespread because, like I tell people all the time, okay, let's say you go and grab a coffee at a kiosk on your way to work. Do you want the person in that kiosk to know how to make coffee? Do you want them to be competent at their job? Yes, you do. If they don't do it well, you get really upset. But are they paid properly for doing that? Part of the Star Trek thing that we talk about in this book, and that I really like the whole debate of, is the post-scarcity society, where money is not the motivator. Like we think about that guy in Lower Decks, right? What was his motivation? He loved his job, right? He wasn't worried about how much he was getting paid because it doesn't matter. Everybody has quarters, everybody has food, everybody has the provisions. And on a starship, because of the room, kind of like a naval vessel, you don't have people that aren't necessary, that aren't doing something that's meaningful, because every person on that ship is meaningful, because there is no extra space. There's no extra goods. There's no extra. There is enough for everyone, right? And when you get in that position, everybody becomes, to a certain extent, equal. Regardless of their rank, regardless of their position, they're equally valuable to an extent, right? And people are doing things that they love because they love to do it. Imagine if a teacher wasn't worried about how much they were getting paid, but they just could teach because they love to teach. Why are teachers leaving the profession in the U.S. in droves? Because they're not getting paid enough.
And
They're
it's not just the US.
one of the most
Yeah.
in demand professions with a huge stress level, and one of the highest responsibilities of any profession is to teach our children, right? To prepare our next generation for life. And we treat them like crap and don't pay them well. Well, why do we think our education system is suffering? Well, duh. I mean, but if teachers didn't have to worry about money, well, then we would have much better teachers, because they would just, if everything was provided for them to a reasonable level. But we don't, it's very difficult for us to adopt that type of a society. And I love how idealistic Star Trek makes that. But I also look at our society and I'm like, we have a long way to go before we can ever get to that level. Long way to go.
I actually don't. I think it's just two differences, just two. But I think the big problem in today's world, and it's really, I mean, I think we all will acknowledge this, is that the wealth, not money, the wealth of the world is in too few hands. So the first, so that, right, so the first solution would then be to eliminate that whole concept, right? The way you do that, and again, you can't necessarily stop what's been already given to them, but you can make it so that anybody can have access to more. We create wealth all the time. That's what ideas, intellectual properties, do. Like, we have that ability to create wealth. All of us do. So to create those opportunities again would be a way to turn that around. The second thing, but the second thing to do, and this is the part I don't know if this would ever happen. It would require that governments and communities would protect from these larger organizations and people that have access to those wealth. That's all I think it would actually take. However, I again, do we as a culture and society have the will to do it? That's a different question altogether, right?
Strangely, we did in like the 30s, 40s, 50s.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely,
in the 80s,
absolutely.
That seemed to have gone away.
Yeah, and that's it, right? But that's my point, right? That value was taken. And now my generation barely remembers it. I was born in 81. I still remember a little bit of that quote unquote golden era. Anyone that comes after me, though, won't. So that idea doesn't really exist for a lot of people anymore. Like, this is what they know.
Yeah.
Right. So what again, going back to my wonderfully cynical aspect of things, right, for just a second, I don't think there's any integrity left. Now the good news is the good news is I have found that any system with no integrity doesn't last long. That's also the bad news. So that's the
Well, and so here's the thing: is I think that there will be, I think, some revolutions happening around the world. Whether they will be bloodless or bloody revolutions remains to be seen. Right. But I think that we are seeing increasingly that people are fed up. I mean, we have a bunch of millennials in the U.S. who don't vote, right? Why don't they vote? Well, they don't feel like their vote makes a difference. But eventually, people are going to tire of that, and they're going to do something that they feel like does make a difference. And whether or not, whatever that looks like, whatever form that takes, I've always told my kids, there's going to be some kind of revolution in your generation. It's a matter of what that's going to look like, right? We're heading that direction. I think
we're heading towards decentralization. That's where we're going. The question is how we get there, right? That's really the only question in my mind. It's like, okay, here's the real world thing. We're heading to a recession. I think we all know this. Here's the question: do we just go straight into the recession, or do we hit inflation first and then go to recession? Right? There's a quick. Right?
Yeah.
Either way, we're going to the recession, right?
Yeah.
We're going towards decentralization. The question is, do we try to centralize everything first, which is what I think, which I see there's a push for that, and then we splinter into a zillion pieces because it's like putting marbles in the corner. And as we so eloquently put up. Remember how big organizations look in terms of bullshit, right? I can only imagine what a situation like that will look like. I do not see it lasting. Second, or the second, or the other way it could go is we all again technology is a wonderful thing. I guess I think the most amazing thing about Star Trek, tying this back to Star Trek, is the fact that you can communicate over vast distances, right?
Yes.
Right. And we're doing that now. I think this is amazing. Like Troy, I'm talking to you from a few hundred miles. I don't know where you're located exactly, Jim, but again, we're
next door to Troy.
Okay, so fair enough. Fair enough. Still impressive though, how no matter how you look at it, and we have exchanged ideas over the last hour and a bit. That's cool, right? Now going like again, be bigger, deeper, wonderful thoughts. Technology has made it so that media, currency, education doesn't have to come from any one particular place anymore. That's just that's just the way it is. That's just where the technology has led us to. So now the question is, with this power, where do we go with it? Right?
Yeah.
Right? That is the magic question going forward. The big government system is dying. You can see it. It's going right. It's going to go through a death throw one way or the other. The question is, how do we get there? Now, I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
I tend to be an optimist about that. I'm a cynic when it comes to government, but I'm an optimist when it comes to people. So that might be the right. Maybe, and Troy is laughing his ass off at that one, right? Right.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, no, I don't.
It's true. It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same thing with corporations. I mean, look at Web 3.0, right?
Yep.
And look at what Meta, Facebook now Meta, is trying to do, right? But look at their stock prices, and look at how quickly people are leaving that platform, especially people that are advertisers. The biggest thing that's going to kill Facebook is that advertising is becoming increasingly decentralized, because the only way it became decentralized was the sharing of data, right? You shared your data with Facebook. They shared it with me. Me as an advertiser, I want to know all of your data and everything about you, so I can sell only the people who are going to buy my books. That's the only people I want to advertise to, right? Because that's perfect for me. As an individual, I don't want you to know anything about me. You know what I mean? I want to protect all my own data, right?
Yeah.
So the way that became centralized was the centralization of data. GDPR and these other privacy issues, what they've done is they've smashed that centralization of data, and they're causing that data to be scattered. Well, that's exactly what we wanted as people in the first place. As advertisers, that doesn't work as well, but we can find other ways to find our people.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. No.
We can find other ways to advertise to our people because we've done it before. We've proven that it can be done.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So we don't need to know everything about you. But Meta is trying really hard to be like, we want to be the first ones to create this metaverse in Web 3.0. The basic thing is, though, if nobody comes, this is not a situation of if you build it, they will come. This is a situation of if you build it, people are going, nope, we don't want any part of that. We want to have our own spaces. And now we have the ability to do that. If I create a website, I can create my own community on there, my own social media on there, and I don't ever have to go to Facebook for any of that. So anyway, all that being said is I think that decentralization we're moving rapidly that way. It's just a matter of what that's going to look like next as far as governance and corporations. And that's what's going to be interesting to see.
Well, I think, and that's why I think some of the desperation you're seeing now is the result. I think government in particular realizes it's going extinct as is. So they have to adapt and change. Now, again, business will always run. The world, like in some ways, the world will always be a business, right? But again, you're the advertiser. Do you really give a shit what my shoe size is unless you're a shoe company? Probably not.
Nope.
You can't, right? You don't give a rat's ass. Oh, you know what? Do you like in your case, do you like your books? Yes. Okay, let's talk. Right? And that's it. That's all you care about. That's all you get. And honestly, as a consumer, I don't mind that. Right?
Yeah.
I don't mind that. Right? Do I want you to know my shoe size? No. I don't think it matters. But I think advertisers in particular are probably the most adaptable of all businesses for that reason. They're like, okay, we're dealing in information, but the information all we care about is making that relationship so we can make that sale. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Right.
Well, if we were in a post-consumer society, think about the Star Trek society and how it works, right? You go to the replicator and you choose something not based on what's been advertised to you, but based on what you've tried before and what you like.
Mm-hmm.
You go and grab a book, whether that's an electronic book or a physical book that something automatically on the ship prints it for you, right? And you choose something based on what you've liked before, what you've been introduced to, or what a friend recommended. But you're not doing it based upon what you've been advertised to.
Exactly.
Because as a creator, as a book creator, I'm living with the same basic income that you are.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter to me it matters much less to me whether you buy my books or not in a Star Trek-like world. In my world, I care a lot about it because I like to eat, clearly. So, I mean, you know what I mean? So the difference is, when artists are creating for the sake of art, because they love it, and people are consuming art because they love that kind of art, and they're not being pushed to and advertised to, but they're just discovering it, then we take apart this middleman of this hardcore marketing that is like, before this whole data revolution, marketing was very much a broad thing to basically make people aware that you existed, and then people chose you based on their personal preferences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then of course we entered the subliminal messages with Coca-Cola and popcorn trying to get you in the theater, and all these different things that people started trying, these new and sneakier and technological things to get a hold of your data to reach you more precisely. Right. But before that, advertising still worked. It was just different.
I would
so
argue
it's the same type of thing. Anyway.
Another
topic.
Another topic. I will say last advertising thing, and I think for Star Trek, I actually think advertising in Star Trek would be a very interesting challenge, because I still think it would be relevant, because here's the thing. You have so much available to you. How do you know what's out there? Right? May not be profit driven, but the idea of having an organization or a group of people advertising, when you get right down to it, is about people enthusiastic about stuff. Yeah, I mean, but that's what you're paying for an advertiser. Hey, this stuff's awesome. Imagine that. Imagine being able to just do that and not worrying about profit. That'd be cool. That would be a cool ass job, right?
Well, and the other thing is, think about how you use data. Instead of using it to drive advertising, you use it to drive curation.
Mm-hmm.
The curation of things in a way that you can see that this person who has these characteristics liked all of these things, and that this person who also shares a large number of those characteristics will also likely like those things. So you're curating it and offering it to those people, not for a profit, not out of some kind of almost malicious intent like some advertisers seem to have, but you're offering it to them for their own good. See, like advertising, even if we think about, okay, it's ridiculous, but the advertising for cigarettes to pregnant women, because doctors were like, hey, it helps you breathe better, right? Because doctors didn't know any better, right? It was stupid in hindsight. But at the time, they were actually advertising it for the good of the women who were pregnant. Their intent, if we go back to that intent discussion, their intent was good. The intent of advertisers was mostly good. Much of the time now, the intent of advertisers is not necessarily for the good of the person. Now, that's not true of a lot of authors advertising. A lot of authors advertising really do want to entertain readers. We really do want readers to read our books. We love our books. And so my intent is not to go and reach people and get people that aren't interested in my type of books to read them, right? I really don't, that's not my intent. But if you think about some of the things like medication ads on television, what in the hell? Am I supposed to go to my doctor and tell him what kind of medicine I need now? No. So the intent of that is much, much different. And I have a much more difficult time getting behind that advertising intent than I do someone doing something for the good of the people that they're advertising to. So anyway, I'll step off that soapbox. Sorry.
No,
we got
way
off topic.
It's all good. It's
Star Trek. Everybody loves Star Trek. Okay.
Actually, so I'm going to ask another evil question. This is the other. Favorite Star Trek writer? For me, I have a name.
Okay.
It's a really good. What?
I have a name, and you may or may not recognize it from the episodes, but if you read the Star Trek novels, you will recognize it. James Blish.
He's good. He's a good choice.
James
Now,
Blish. Now, and here's why. And this is very weird. So I was very, very lucky, and Jim and I kind of share this too, is that, whoever our local librarians were apparently Trekkies, or at least there was one of them that was a Trekkie, because there were all the Star Trek novels. You went into the Star Trek section, and there was just lots of Star Trek novels, right? And so I read many of the novels because it was easier. It was easier for me sometimes to read things, to check out things from the library and read things, than to see them on television. And that was partly the household and the culture that I grew up in, where, obviously at that time we had one shared television. My mom did not listen to sci-fi. I watched every episode of Lawrence Welk, but we did not, you know what I mean? And we watched Wizard of Oz every fucking year. But whatever. But we did not see much Star Trek, right? Okay. But I could read books. And so I escaped a lot into science fiction. And Star Trek was like my gateway to science fiction. Okay, so it was like my gateway drug. And then I went everywhere. Ben Bova, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, L. Ron Hubbard. I even read Dianetics at one point, discovered it was Christianity only with engrams. And anyway, another discussion for another time. But anyway, and so Arthur C. Clarke, all those guys, right? So anyway, so James Blish's, I thought his Star Trek novels were some of the best as far as characterization, as far as the world building and development of the novels. I still think that they are. And so, yes, James Blish, I would say, if I had to pick one, that would be the guy.
Okay. How about you, Jim?
Okay. I hate the favorite thing.
I know. I told you it was an evil question. I did this on purpose.
Well, I'm really bad at it. I don't have favorites. I have lists. So I'm gonna throw three names. DC Fontana wrote.
Mine.
So
No. See, that one was mine. That one's mine.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Okay,
I'm gonna throw
going.
another a little weirder one. Harlan Ellison.
Not weird.
Yes.
One. I know why he's on the list. I know why he's on the list.
Yes.
And then a really out there one who didn't write episodes but wrote a book that I just adored from the Star Trek universe. John M. Ford wrote How Much for Just the Planet, which is a Star Trek comedy that is hilarious. A musical comedy.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
And
that one
another one. I'm going to throw another one out there. Vonda McIntyre was another one.
Solid choice.
Vonda McIntyire. Oh God. You see how much we hate this question. You realize this, right?
No.
You realize
I did this on purpose.
You wanted one answer from each of us. You got like 7.
Okay, so I'll give you mine. First and foremost, DC Fontana. It's not like I read it. If you can honestly make an author that made more of an impact on Star Trek on a multitude of levels, I don't think you can make an argument against her at all. Also, the fact that she broke ground as one of the first female screenwriters in, right? That cannot be stated how awesome she was. So for her, and by the way, and my favorite episode that she wrote, The Measure of a Man, Data's Trial. That was hers. That was hers.
Yes.
So
Love that one.
Also, she wrote the Harlan Ellison City on the Edge Forever. She was the one that actually did the television version of that. Little known fact. So number 1.
Wow.
Number 2, Peter David.
Oh yes. Okay, that's another good one. Okay.
Yeah. So now I am more of a fan of his New Frontier than his Next Generation novels. I don't hate you if you like his Next Generation novels. They're good, but his New Frontier, I think, is him at his best in Star Trek. So that's just my opinion, right?
No, I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
Right. And the creative team for Robert Hewitt Wolf is the other one I really, really like. So Early Deep Space Nine, early late some of the later Star Trek Next Generation episodes were his. So those are my and the other ones I can list a whole bunch of others, but those are my three. I figured since I asked you guys the evil question, I would answer it. But yes, right. But yeah, like for me, it's DC Fontana first, and then it's everybody else. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. No, the thing is, I couldn't argue with anybody on either of your lists, really.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those questions like there, and again, this is another thing that here's what I feel about this book in a lot of ways, and I won't get overly emotional about it, but I feel like being able to even write about my love of Star Trek, my passion for Star Trek, and even to be in the same sentence with someone that said Star Trek authors is a really big deal to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't do this because I think this book will sell like gangbusters, although I think it will sell very well. Right. But that's not why I did it. I did it because, first of all, I love Star Trek. Second of all, I love philosophy. I love the Taoist Buddhist philosophy, and I love how it comes through in many different ways in our society, even in religions that claim that they are very, very far from the Tao and the Buddha and stuff like that. But there are so many commonalities. There are so many things that I just absolutely love it. So to me, the part of writing this book is it feels like a privilege, right? It feels like something that I'm like, I am excited to just have been able to do it and to be a part of it. I was glad when Jim was like, can you come on and help me co-write this? Because I went, yes, I can. Oh, by the way, we do have to mention something that we have not mentioned on your show.
You're right.
Jim, I am Troy Lambert. In the middle of your screen is Jim Lambert. We are not related.
No.
If you read the bio on the back of the book, you will see that we are not related. We met in a writer's group in 2013. Jim introduced himself. I looked down like, what the hell? We looked at each other. And seriously, and so we checked back but we have people in our families with the similar names. I have an Aunt Sandra.
I have a mom who's Sandra.
Yeah, we have Carolyn's. We have people in our family that have the same names, not the same people. I tell people we've been married, but not to each other. Very important to get that part in there. But we've just been friends ever since. So for me, when the agent had the idea for the Star Trek book, and I'm like, Jim, you want to write a Star Trek book? I mean, it makes sense for James T. Lambert to write a book about Star Trek, right? And then when he invited me on as co-author, I can tell you that for us, I think for both of us, this is a privilege to be able to write this book. And to be able to do it with one of my best friends makes it even better. I mean, there's just so many things that are so good about it. So anyway,
this was quite an experience.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a good spot to wrap this up, I think. But before we wrap it up, I have one final question. This one is not as evil, I promise. This is okay.
Oh.
Okay. And this might be more for Jim than Troy. I don't know, because Troy, you've written a lot of stuff. But doing this book, what did you learn?
Ooh, not to wait as long for asking for help.
That's a good lesson.
It's a really important lesson. So I got started trying to write novels and such in about 2011, and I did pretty well for a while, and then I got really stuck. And I mean really stuck, like writing, less than 1,000 words in a year, kind of stuck. So less than 4 pages. Bad. And I was kind of hoping this would be a Kickstarter for me to get me back into the flow and stuff. And it has in some ways, but it wasn't. I kind of did it a disservice when I said, I'm going to try this, and using it as a Kickstarter for me rather than having that power to push into it and make it better. And so when I went to Troy and said, I gotta have some help. I can't finish this. I just can't. I don't know what to do next. And yeah, getting help for it was critical, and it made the book so much better. So that was just wonderful. But yeah, learning to ask for help on time. I learned a lot about Trek that I hadn't known. Uh, I went back and reconnected with some people I knew were Trek fans, and then suddenly found out how big a Trek fan they were. You remember our
Yes.
best beta reader?
Oh my goodness, she was awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say that I learned from this book primarily was, first of all, I have collaborated on books before. I have never enjoyed collaboration as much as I enjoyed it with this book. Um, and I mean, that has everything to do with the person that I'm collaborating with at this point, and also the subject matter. But I think one of the things I learned about this book is I learned a lot more about the cast, but I also learned a lot more about other Trek fans. Kind of the same thing Jim was talking about. I suddenly found people that were, some people were way bigger Trekkies than I imagined them to be. Some people were very surface Trekkies. And they were like, yes, I like the shows and I like the series, but I really don't. They never went deep with the philosophy and the things like that, like I did. Because for me, that was part of my love for the series. For them, they just loved the characters, they loved the stories, and that type of thing. So there was a lot of diversity there in the fan base that I quite honestly didn't realize exactly what that looked like. And it made me very happy in a lot of ways. Um, and it made me appreciate Star Trek more. I think I went back and rewatched. I went back and rewatched a lot of it. I intended to go back and rewatch a few things in an episode here and there. And next thing you knew, I was 6 seasons in, covered in Cheetos, sitting on my couch wondering what the hell happened. You know.
Did you care at that moment? Did you care at that moment?
No, I didn't really care. But anyway, I mean, but you know what I'm saying is sometimes you reignite a love for something I didn't realize. I didn't remember some of the episodes. I mean, DS9 is one of them. I didn't realize how much I loved DS9. I rewatched DS9, and my wife rewatched it with me, and we went,
good.
"Wow, this is really good." Now we knew it was good. It wasn't intellectually. It was that we had forgotten. You know what I mean? Some of the good things about it. So, for me, I would encourage people not only to read this book, because I want you to buy and read this book. If you're a Trekkie, I want you to see it. I want you to love it. I want you to tell me what you think about it. I want you to tell us what you think about it. But I also encourage you to go back and watch some of those old episodes. When we mention an episode in there, go back and watch it and go, oh, yeah. Because your brain will click in and you will remember that thing. And if you end up on your couch covered in Cheetos and not wondering what day it is, even if it's my fault, just email me and tell me how angry you are at me. But remember how great a time you had watching that series. Because it to me, it's anyway, it's just part of the privilege of writing this book, part of the privilege of being a part of this community. And I'm really, anyway. That's me.
I actually want to thank you both for actually doing this with me, because I am, like I said, as we definitely talked, I am a Star Trek fan for sure. Yeah. So it's cool to kind of talk about some of the Star Trek concepts and ideas and some of the things we go with. Okay, I do have one final question. One final one. I did. It's a good one though. It is a good one, and this one is an evil one. I am going to say this.
Goody.
Best captain, your opinion.
Man,
that was an evil one. I told you up front.
Okay.
Yeah.
So look, I'm just going to stick with my favorite series and say Picard because of the leadership things. Now, but let me qualify this, okay, by saying Picard, yes, but a really close second for me would be Sisko.
So,
there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, that's probably a whole other show that we could talk about, just Star Trek captains.
Yes.
But I would say Picard, number one. As much as I love Kirk, I have a lot of nostalgia for Kirk, but I love the leadership style of Picard. And I loved Sisko because of the differences that he brought to the Star Trek captain's position. So I love them both for two different reasons. if I had to pick one of the two to say that's my favorite, I would say Picard.
So just for the record, this is like an ice cream flavor question. Like it does. You're right. No matter what you choose, but it is an evil. It is an evil choice.
So just like ice cream, he stole the last of the chocolate chip that I was going to have, and it's exactly the same. Picard is really, he is really kind of the epitome of what a captain in Starfleet should be. He is a diplomat. He is a leader. He is a philosopher. He's intelligent and strong in a moral and so on way, rather than fisticuffs. You know, he's a good choice. Sisko is a really, really strong second. Yeah, I love Kirk, but he's a cowboy.
Mm-hmm. And for this time, he's perfect. So it's the reverse. It's the reverse for me. It's Sisko first, Picard second. Picard is the captain we all aspire to be. Sisko's the man.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is that fair?
I could give you that. I think like you, I don't think there's a wrong answer.
No, there isn't.
Between those two. I don't think there's a wrong answer. I could agree with you, and I could go either way.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we all three picked the same top two.
Yeah, exactly.
That is it may say something about our generation.
A little bit. Oh, like I said, in all fairness, I don't have the same love for Discovery as I love for, and that's just me. It's not my show.
Yeah.
Right. And Lower Decks, it's not really about captains. Right. There are good people on that show, but it's not really about captains. Right. So, and as far as the current Picard show goes, it's not really a captain show.
It's not a captain show. Yeah. Not a captain show.
So it's just like Kirk's a cowboy. He's fun. Janeway and Kirk, that's an interesting discussion for another episode. Right?
Yeah.
Like if you look at it, like again, Picard, for all the reasons you said, is the epitome of what a captain should be. Sisko, though, I think considering the kind of man he was, is like I'd want to be like Sisko as a man, but I'd like to want to be Picard as a captain, and I'm actually okay with that. You know?
I'm actually so. Hey, we'll leave this one here, but we should say in probably about 8 weeks or so, 10 weeks or so, we should have a Strange New Worlds watch party.
That'd be fun.
And watch one of the episodes.
Yeah.
And just watch one of the episodes together and provide running commentary, kind of like Star Trek Mystery Science Theater 3000 or something like that.
When we get off the air, we'll let me know what the schedule is, and we'll figure something out, and we can definitely do it.
Yeah, all right. Let me find out when everything releases, and we'll figure something out, and we'll do it.
Then, gentlemen, then this is your floor for the moment. How would you like to promote your book going out the door here?
Well, and thanks for the great entertainment. I wish you a nice week too. Yes, that's absolutely true. So you can find our book everywhere. The Tao of Trek by Troy Lambert and Jim Lambert. It's the only one by Troy Lambert and Jim Lambert. And you can find it on our website, the-tao-trek.org.
Tao-
is the website.
Trek.
Tao-of-trek.org. I had to pull it up.
No, sorry, I didn't quite get that right. Hold on a second here. Let's do that again. But is that basically right? The way I had that the first time?
In the comment.
No.
Hey,
there we go.
Technology.
Somebody's smart. Somebody's smart and pulled it up.
I am a trained professional, and I had no help from James whatsoever getting this exactly right here. Not at all. Not even a little bit.
But
anyway,
totally.
Yeah.
So,
guys,
it was close.
Go to tao-trek.org. The website is episode description right here. It will be in the audio episode description as well for more information. And is there anything else you guys would like to say, where to find you guys, or just is this where you guys want everything to go?
You know what? Chase us around social media. We're also going to be at some cons this year. So if you see a con where we have a vendor booth, stop by. We'll sign books for you. We'll have some cool merchandise and all that kind of stuff. And we're open to talking to Trek. If you buy me whiskey in the bar, I'll talk Trek with you all night long.
Whiskey's good. I would, whiskey, scotch, Irish cream, just something alcoholic. We'll talk.
We'll work something out.
We'll work something
out. I promise.
Yeah, like that. You came prepared, Jim. I respect you, man. I respect you.
This is my work office.
Yeah. Hey. I respect you even more now. This is great. That'll do it for this episode of Just Joshing. I normally promote my stuff, but I think this is a great way to wrap up. Tomorrow night, Shauna Wainer, cosplayer extraordinaire, is my guest. We're going to have fun talking cosplay, doing something a little different. I want to thank Jim and Troy for coming on and handling being with me for over 100 minutes. I mean, you guys somehow found a way. For everybody watching, everybody listening, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Stay inspired. Keep shining in the dark. And I will see you guys tomorrow. I can't do this as well, but live long and prosper.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.